So it is an honor to be able to moderate this conversation because we have a lot to talk about. Let's begin with how you both feel about the time we're in. I'm curious, when you think back to the late 1950s and early 1960s, did you feel, as I have to admit I sometimes do, disheartened? There's not a day when a story doesn't cross Twitter or the news where some young, usually black man has been shot by the police. How do you feel about the time that we're in today? Are you optimistic or are you feeling depressed about it?
I believe that there is a great deal going on for us to be disheartened about. And I think that to lose that fact and to lose that focus would be to our worst interests. However, having said that, there's also an awful lot going on that we should be mindful of and be rewarded by. A few years ago, I would have said to you that somewhere the culture of the 1950s and 60s that had done so much to wage a battle against human oppression, not just in the black experience, but it was a time when in the 1950s and 60s, Africa was just emerging as a society, coming into the realm of independence. Ghana was just becoming independent, Kenya just becoming independent. So there was this large African mobilization globally that everybody was very much aware of. But also, there was this great appetite on the part of young people here to be vigorously resistant to the war in Vietnam. So between an international front, a local front that had to do with disengaging from the war in Vietnam, and then the rise of the black voice in this country, the generations that came after us inherited an awful lot. And I think they got a little carried away with the harvest. They began to pay attention to opportunity more than paying attention to responsibility. Opportunity was there. It was theirs. It was there for them to have. It was there for them to plunder, as they should have and did. But we fell asleep at the gates of the greater truth. And I think that in that period, we went through a very me period in our culture. Everything was about my time, my money, my thing. There was very little we in the debate. What I've experienced most recently is in the midst of that concern, there's been the emergence of these young people in Ferguson, these young people down in Florida, these young people in Baltimore, not just in terms of activism and young people rebelling against the prison system and all the cruelties that young people are exposed to, but on the cultural front, artists like Usher, artists like Common, artists like Dougie, Dougie Fresh is an old timer. He's almost as old. He's one of the first of my discoveries. But and if you take a look at the things that Jay-Z has been doing recently in mobilizations, not only the mobilizations in Central Park, but most recently the convening that he held in Barclay, out in Brooklyn, you begin to see the evidence of the fact that there's a greater consciousness. And these artists are stepping to the fore and saying things that lead us back to the place of concern where we should be dwelling.
What raised your consciousness? What was the thing that made you say, maybe I'm an activist in addition to being a performer and being a writer?
Well, unfortunately, no matter what I say, I'm never going to be able to upstage that. So I won't attempt. But what I will say is that this conversation comes at a time where I think it's a necessity for us as artists to use our platforms in a significant way that they used everything that they got or they had in order for us to have that platform.
Is there a risk to that? I mean, you stick your neck out, you're an activist, is there a risk?
Well, I don't know if I would consider myself an activist as of yet. I'm an actualist. And I'm only pointing at the issue so that you are activated. You are invited to have the same inquisitive nature that I do. To wonder, what could I do to make a difference for my children? What could I do to make a difference for those whom I care for? What I consider myself as a person who is really a product of a village. My father didn't raise me. He wasn't there. And there's so many people whom I now advocate for as a philanthropist, working with youth through my New Look Foundation, but I can't get to them if they're not alive. I can't get to them if they're not convicted with the same reality of what is happening. So I wasn't there in the 50s. I wasn't there in the 60s, but I've obviously seen how it does work. And I couldn't think of a better way to get an education about it than to call not only you, but also to a man whom I've now looked at in my village of people who are cultivating and raising this activist as a father figure, as a champion and a hero for a cause that is greater than his and a cause that has benefited me.
You have a new song that debuted on Tidal, and it's called Chains. And I want to play a clip for everyone first, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. Can we roll that clip? It's using facial recognition.
So the hashtag and the information displayed on the screen, I hate that we took it down before it was time, because I really do invite each and every one of you to have a look at it online. My idea in attacking this issue was something that was mutually shared by another incredible entrepreneur as well as partner, Jay-Z, who's in the audience tonight. We, for many years, have been talking about significant messaging and really standing in the light. Well, this is the light that I've chosen to stand in, and it is one that's not serving for me, but serves all of us, and it serves my children, it serves your children, it serves the country that is supposed to be a land of free, a land of opportunity, a land of optimism, a land of true choice, a land the reality of what I really hoped for in reaching out to Jay was to do something that I felt was significant. And he was 100% on board. We talked about doing something around another major musical event, but to do something even greater, to serve all of the artists who are Tidal artists and a part of the Tidal family. The concert was put together, and we launched the Change campaign. The technology allows you to listen to the music and also to face the issue. The idea for me was, in order to fix it, we have to face it. The technology provides that if you do not look in the eyes of the victims, the music doesn't play, the music stops. I don't know if that deserves an applause. It is an effort. It's an effort that I feel is only opening the conversation, a conversation that is much greater than just the lives that have been lost. And within the time that we put it together, there have only been people added to the equation, not taken away. So when does it stop? When do we really face the issues that are within our system? That's why we're here, y'all.
You've talked about unleashing radical thought, and I think that technology, which forces, right? A minute, if you turn away, it stops.
Yep.
And in a way, it's a great metaphor for, I think, actually a lot of the actions of the 60s. Once you were able to get people's eyes on what was really happening, same thing. They had to see, and then they had to act. What is the answer to the question that Usher has just posed? What is the next step of that?
I believe that the answers to that question are necessarily multiple. And I don't think any one answer that we can give would be sufficient to encompass the dynamic of what the total answer would be about. It's an interesting thing to me about art in America. I've always found that all art exists to inform. Paul Robeson, who was my mentor and a great figure of his time, once pointed out that artists are the gatekeepers of truth. They are the moral voice of civilization. And that in that context, everything that we knew about art from a black perspective was really deeply rooted, in how we use the art form to express our history, our degradation. If you don't dig deep into the real details of history, if you don't see it through the prism that a guy like Steve McQueen created for us to see it through, when you go and you see 12 Years a Slave, you'll have to understand that there were millions of people who were told that if they spoke any language other than the language of their masters, their tongues would be removed from their heads. We were not permitted to read. We were not permitted to write. We were not permitted to congregate in numbers of people that would be considered by the oppressor as threatening to the stability of slavery. And in that context, we relied on the song to be the conveyor and the portrayer of our image. Our hymns, our spirituals are all about crossing the river of defiance. One day we will greet the land of promise. Everything in our culture, in our art, was about liberation. It wasn't until the turn of the century when somewhere the merchants of culture understood that too much art about what matters in life impedes the race to the bank. And we must therefore find a delineation between what art does for many of us, which is to inform, to stimulate, to encourage, to inspire, to do nothing but entertain. So there was this sharp, abrupt shift from being the voice of protest, the voice of change, that had engulfed black culture, to this moment when all we did was to tap dance and get the minstrel going, and keep white folks happy. And for a long time, that was what paid off. And we have been wrestling with that fact for most of the last century. And certainly coming into this century, we face a lot of the same obstacles and problems. What is absolutely rewarding is for me at the age of almost 90, sitting here looking at Usher. Don't be too hasty, I'm looking for 91. But to look at Usher, to look at Common, and to look at the things that Jay-Z is stepping in here to speak about and to do and to reveal, that's a huge reward. And I'm glad that I lived long enough to see this emergence, because change is just one of thousands of other songs that have to be written and stories that have to be told. Just my last point on this is that I'm enamored of Jewish history. And I recently looked at yet another story coming from Dachau, Buchenwald, and Auschwitz, and the suffering of the Jew and the depth of man's inhumanity to man revealed through the history of the crucifixion of that tribe. Well, very much the same thing prevails now. I think we are at the doorstep of a time when you get the Tea Party and you get a candidate like, and I'm not pushing for Hillary Clinton, but I'm defending the fact that this woman was put upon by a group of savage, bestial men who say they lead this country. And trying to create an atmosphere of dissension, of anguish, of pain, and for us to be at one another. And I think that Usher, and Common, and Jay-Z, and a lot of the guys are stepping into this space to say, here's another view, here's another sound. And I think, if I'm correct, they will prevail.
Are these conversations that you have with Jay-Z, with Common, do you literally sit down and say, you know, we need to think about social activism. We need to pick up the gauntlet that's been thrown down? Because he had some unpleasant words, harsher words for performers, for artists, where he felt that, you know, we were talking about that in the back, where you felt that artists weren't stepping up to leverage their platform.
Well, such artists of substance in the past who have been endowed with the responsibility given their reality to fight. There's a difference between where they were and where we are. And the idea that the salvation that they were fighting for, we've arrived at, is the reality of what I'm fighting for. I do have that conversation.
You strategize with these things.
With everyone. I mean, because everyone plays a different part. Everyone does have a different song. Everyone has a different approach. Everyone coming from a different region understands the reality of what they can do region to region with their influence. What is left is a responsibility to dialogue about it, to empower people to understand that our numbers make a difference. Our votes do make a difference, and not just presidentially, but on a state level. When we make sure that we understand the power state to state and who we put in office, that begins to make a difference. That's the conversation. For me,
Yes.
you know, the reason why I wanted to have this debate is because, you know, me and Harry, we sit around and we'll talk, and I'll ask a million questions. I'm inquisitive in my young age, you know, because I just...
I felt that.
As I'm attempting to find what I think all of us are, a definition of what life means for us and the legacy that we will leave behind. But we've never had a camera, we've never had an audience, we never had an opportunity for someone to understand and hear the value of what they offer. And that's why I wanted to do this. But always, every opportunity I'm given, I'm speaking about it. And not from a judgmental place, from a place of understanding that everyone has a significant part in this. And you don't have to be black in order to make a difference and be a part of this transition. Everyone has a role. You said it. That's right.
So when you look at a movement like Black Lives Matter, which is a movement that doesn't have one single leader, different than Martin Luther King Jr. Leading this civil rights movement, is that problematic? Is that going to be what moves legislation, policy, people? How do we get to that change that you're talking about?
I think that change comes about in a give and take, in a encountering an experience and responding to that experience. For instance, I'm interested in that a lot of people talk about the fact that we have no leader like Dr. King, and as evident as that fact would bear out such a position, the fact is that we had thousands of leaders in the civil rights movement. They did not reach the level of visibility or the praises that was heaped upon Dr. King themselves personally. But I think that if you look at Fannie Lou Hamer, if you look at Ella Baker, if you look at a person like Diane Nash, she was 17 years old and with child, sitting in the group of men called SNCC, who were looking for who they were. All of them were nameless and faceless up until that moment. And then when you take a look, it's John Lewis, who was 18 years old, Jesse Jackson, who was 19 years old. In fact, the old man in the room was Dr. King. And I was the elder, because I was 2 years older than Dr. King. But I was 26, Dr. King was 24. All those thousands of young men that stepped into the space to make up CORE, to make up SCLC, to make up SNCC, to make up the active communities of the NAACP. We were replete with numbers and people who effectively took on the responsibility to lead the charge, to change. And I think that now we see that evidencing itself again. If you meet with the young leaders from Ferguson, if you meet with the young leaders from Florida, the young people that have emerged with, I'm thinking primarily of Philip Agnew. When you think of people coming out of Baltimore, when you think of all the people coming out of St. Louis and other places, there are pockets of rebellion beginning to express itself. That rebellion also is reflected in what we saw in Wall Street, the Wall Street Rebellion. Everybody said, well, they are leaderless. What do they want?
Occupy Wall Street.
Huh?
Occupy Wall Street. When people
Occupy
are
Wall
trying to figure out, well, who's running this particular protest?
But they were declaring what they wanted. They wanted an end to greed. They wanted an end to Wall Street running off with the prize. What they were asking for is, where's the violence? And somehow, if you don't see violence, the assumption is no progress is being made. Well, that's not quite true. That's not quite true.
Do you worry, Usher, that people are apathetic? That, you know, when we talk about some of these protests, I remember people would say, I can't believe all the traffic was blocked while I was trying to get home. You know, you're like, well, there's a movement being started.
Well,
Sorry, that's inconvenienced you. But truly, sometimes I wonder, is everyone ready to embrace the discomfort, if you will, of change?
Well, the point really isn't whether you're ready. It's whether you're ready or not. It's coming.
Do you see apathy, or do you see young people who are interested?
I see young people who are engaged and obviously very upset. It really comes down to you guys and the way it's being reported.
That's true. That's true. And I'll tell you, it's a tough story to sell. I remember trying to do a story on poverty in America. We wanted to look at income inequality, and I was told, nobody wants to look at that. Nobody wants to see that. So I think it's much easier for the media to go cover when it becomes a fight. When it spirals into violence, then it becomes reportable. Yeah. But everything before that, not so much.
And the very same people who make that editorial decision that your story is irrelevant if it's not filled with negativity are the very same people who create the environment of oppression. So they're playing the game on all fronts. Their con, the Ponzi scheme is at work. we not only name the game, but we may name the rules. And I think that the more sophisticated people become, I think that this response that we're getting, that a lot of young people saying, yeah, I want to go to college and I want to get a degree, but then I got a brother and I got a sister and I got a cousin who began to get an education and got one, and they got their degree. And I look at them and I don't want to be them. They are not doing anything. They've got the degree and they're saying nothing. What are my other options? Well, I wouldn't recommend that you don't get an education. But it is what does the system do to anoint you with a sense of values? What are the values you pursue, and what do you want to see and change? Dr. King was a man that was fraught with moral opinion, with a moral point of view that was unshakable. Dr. Du Bois, all the leaders that I looked at, one of the greatest women of the 20th century will never be acknowledged for her greatness because she was considered a class traitor. Her name was Eleanor Roosevelt. She stepped in as the wife of the president and did more stuff for people than you can shake a stick at. She spoke out for the Japanese people when they were interned illegally. Not that you can intern anyone legally. They were interned, the brutality that was heaped upon them. When she stepped in to look at what happened to black men in Port Chicago during that time when all those sailors were put on, and I was a member of that time, all those men that had been charged with mutiny, and in a time of crisis, military, in times of war, mutiny is punishable by death. Well, a young lawyer by the name of Thurgood Marshall stepped in to take this case, and at his back was Eleanor Roosevelt. But what people like this did was they brought values to the need for change, and those values prevailed. And I think what Usher is bringing to the song, what I think a lot of young politicians are trying to do in spaces that they're filling at this moment, is trying to find the key to their morality, find the key to their center, trying to ascertain what can they possibly do to make a difference. Well, I'm glad he came to me because the map is there. The path has been crossed before, and it's waiting for you to cross it again. And that path will have to be crossed many times before we see glory.
Yeah. My assessment goes far past the reality of what I'm looking at on the surface, but an evaluation of the education, as you said. For me, in your time, you guys advocated for what was human. What I'm hoping we will begin to advocate for is what is necessity, which is better education, which is the key for any progress in our inner cities.
Absolutely.
That is the reality of what I think the conversation comes down to.
What do you want people in this audience to walk away with? You'll feel like you have really reached individuals if what happens?
Well, what I'd like to see them walk away with, they're not going to walk away with. Because they're not getting enough of it.
Yeah.
But I would say this, that I would like people to walk away from an evening such as this, not only with a sense that change is in the mix, that there are young men and women stepping to the plate to make that change happen, and that they have to take a look, the audience and those who hear this kind of voice have to take a look and see what role have you played in the absence of your children and your family knowing the greater truth? What role have you played in resisting the discomfort of truth? Soledad has made a point. Most people don't want to be disturbed. They don't want to have their day interrupted by some some discontent walking down the street, blocking traffic, making me late for work. Yeah, well, you're being led to a place that makes you late for work because we're talking about a young black child that's just been murdered by a policeman. The fact that you may get to work a little late today because you're being given information and instructed is a cheap price for you to pay for what could be.
I want to get to some questions from our audience. This is a great one. We often have a glorified view of the civil rights movement. What were some of the tactics used to unify these freedom fighters? And how do you leverage both those tactics and technology to pass that on to a new generation?
What gives me pause is a statement that we have glorified the civil rights movement. I think we have extracted moments in the civil rights movement to attest to the glory that is America, while America still eludes a path to that glory. America professes to be a very moral nation, yet almost everything about what we have done to become the power we are today was rooted in a vast immorality. Was rooted to those who would suggest that the civil rights movement was an excursion on a joyride, do not really then understand that movement, every battle that was charted, that was defined, that was discussed, that was strategized, we never lost one battle, not one. If you take a look at all of them carefully, we set out to talk about voting rights, we got voting rights. We talked about human rights, we got human rights. We talked about ending the war in Vietnam, we brought that to a close. Everything that we did, everything that SNCC did, everything that youth did in that period to change the conditions, the changing of curriculum, bringing in black study programs, all of it a bit minor. We need to do much more of it, but everything we did, Dr. King, in the fight for civil rights and for human rights and for the vote, we got, not only through him, but through the mechanism of power as expressed by Kennedy, particularly Bobby Kennedy, who took the charge of the Kennedy clan to a new level of hope for America, and then Lyndon Baines Johnson and what he did. There were mistakes that he made, but there were things that he also did that made a huge difference for this country in insisting on the Voting Rights Act. Where I find the greatest loss, and particularly grievous for me, is how black people talk daily about the vote, how they talk daily about those things that must be done to achieve the ends that we seek to achieve.
How do you mean?
10 million black people did not vote in the last election who were eligible to vote. Most of that 10 million resides in the South. If all of those people who could have voted, we would not be sitting here today with this conversation.
Are there tactics that you would say to Usher, think of it this way, this is what we did back in the 60s. One thing to remember, a lesson that we learned, is that part of the conversations the two of you have?
Yes, and beyond. Because one of the things that I said to Usher, in many things that we have said and will continue to say, is that there's a price to pay for activism. There are a lot of people going to find you and try to make you chump change. But it is going to be up to your resilience and the depth of your own humanity and your own truth to be able to say, you cannot invent a punishment that will be grievous enough for me to abandon the cause of the hunt for freedom and for human rights. as long as his song is being sung, because his power is his art. His power is the platform and the millions of people who listen to him, who hum his melodies and will quote his verse. Those are the hearts and minds he should keep in mind and be attracting to a deeper truth, a deeper sense of being in the music that he delivers and gives. His art is his strength.
Usher, I'm going to ask you this question. How can we encourage the youth to be as proactive as the activists of old without using anger or violence as their voice?
I think first and foremost, having an understanding of what the playbook was and is still to this day. The idea that when we come together peacefully with clarity, showing numbers makes the difference. That is the most important part for me. That is the thing that I preach and I speak to each and every person. But more than anything, getting an education. I have a fortunate opportunity to speak to peers, men who have been active, but you have the same right. You have the same opportunity to go online. The information is readily available for you, down to each and every footnote and note and speech, to know what took place, what was asked for, if it worked, what didn't work, and when there were obstacles.
In the question you just asked, Usher, I would challenge one word: anger. I believe that Dr. King more than once said that anger is the fuel to our cause. Without anger and enough rage, people will not be moved to action. So I agree, anger coupled with violence becomes destructive. Anger coupled with cause and courage becomes liberating.
During the civil rights movement, there were hubs and organizations where young people could get involved. Where do we go to get involved? How do we organize a new generation of leaders?
Well, I would tell you that if you go to Ferguson and look to the community for what are the people in Ferguson doing in the face of the brutality that that community has experienced. If you go to Florida and look at Philip Agnew and what that community has put together, if you take a look at what's going on in Baltimore, here in New York, in Staten Island, there are thousands of titles and causes. There are thousands of organizations that speak to the issue, and if you maintain that you can't find them, it's because the rock you're looking under is not where it resides. We are out there. We are out there. We're out there by the hundreds. We're out there by the thousands. We're out there. You talk about policemen. You can go into the Policemen's Benevolent Association, the Black Policemen's fraternity, and they will tell you they want to get guns out of the hands of people. They will tell you that they have a cause in and of themselves. Within the very people whom we seek to demonize, a lot of cops didn't come out there to kill. They came out there to genuinely serve the community. It's what they're being required to do by those who manipulate the use of the military and the use of the police that gives them this tinge of sense of that they're the opposition. But there are a lot. You can go to NAACP and just tap in on anything you want to find on a whole spectrum of light stuff or heavy duty stuff. It's all there. It's where you're looking for application that I think will be in the final analysis what serves you.
Sankofa.org.
Social media activism is a start, but how do we move beyond hashtags?
I believe that there are things beyond hashtag, but like myself, I wouldn't be too quick to get rid of hashtag. It serves a purpose. It's there. When we have Sankofa, when I first walked in, went to Ferguson and looked at the anguish in that community, as I'd looked at anguish in other communities in the world, I realized that that community was ready to make a statement and to do what it had to do. It lacked resources. And my task was to say, how do we find the money? How do we find the resources to fuel whatever aspect of this that we can? And I looked at the greatest treasury that we have in our community. I said earlier that never before in the history of America have we had such a harvest of celebrity with black people as we are experiencing today. We have more black guys and gals who are record stars, who are Hollywood stars, who are athletes, who are in government, in education. They're huge. Those people have to make the decision to apply themselves to those who need instruction and guidance. And with all of that at our disposal, I think that we have a lot to work with. We've got to understand that the tools are at our disposal. We just have to find out where those tools reside. And I tell you, they reside in your community. They reside in the organizations that have already declared themselves. They reside in my song. They reside in his song. Look at Chains. Sankofa was what we turned to because Sankofa.org was to use an institutional base to attract artists, to say, a lot of artists want to know, well, what can I do? Well, Sankofa sorts out the deal of the day, sorts out what's going on in communities, what do they need. We put it through analysis, and we send artists into the fray to do concerts, to do mobilizations in community. A lot of these guys, they can attract, well, just recently, look at what happened out in Brooklyn. I mean, thousands of people showed up to be entertained. Thousands of people can leave informed. We have to bring people not only to entertain, but what information do we leave them with? And where do we send them? That's the power of the art.
The video is very moving and tough, really, to watch, even though it's just faces of young men. Was there anyone who said, don't do this? You know, if you want to be involved, if you want to, write a check. No, you know, don't put yourself on the line. Is there anyone who sort of stepped back, who you think could step forward with their platform?
In my face, everyone supported. The harsh reality is that not many stood.
Did that give you pause?
No, it didn't, because I know that the inquisitive nature that surely brought you here today is the working. You are leading the charge. The hashtag services as a reminder of relevance. The more something is relevant, the more it's fueled. Numbers.
For the first time in the history of this country, we have an African American as president. How do we teach the youth respect when the youth have seen so much disrespect toward President Obama from so many? That's a good question.
Thank God he's here.
I don't disrespect the president. That has to be, I think, put on the table for great clarity. I have a great respect for the office of the presidency. There were great expectations when Barack Obama stepped into the fray. He was not pressured into taking on the responsibility of leading this country. It was a challenge that he wanted. It was a job that he stepped in and auditioned for. He campaigned for it in doing all those things with his blackness, with his education, with his articulation, with his multiracial history, he brought to the table a huge bag of promise for what the future could be like, because he represented all these things. What I think happened was that he opted to select those things that he would apply himself to that did not touch the core needs of the community. To be the black president and have no black agenda is, to me, quite puzzling. To say that you're against war and that in your time all the troops will be brought home from Afghanistan, I understand rationale. I read papers, I know editorials, but the truth of the matter is that promise has been sidestepped. This is not about Barack Obama as a personality. It's about the fact that our history offered us an opportunity to say and to do things. The American people that voted for Barack Obama made one very clear statement: we are ready to be led. Black people weren't the only ones that got Barack Obama elected president. A whole bunch of white people were very much in here. And they came with expectations. They came with a promise that this was the next leg up. We've just had all we had with Bush. We just had all we have with these wars that we're going into, with a great touch of insanity and arrogance. And when Barack Obama stepped into the fray, he was the voice of change. As a matter of fact, he created a slogan in his time saying, "Yes, we can." Everybody, that was the slogan, "Yes, we can." The political cleverness, if you can call it that, was that the sentence was never finished. Yes, we can what? So a lot of us filled in that yes, we can with things that we wanted to say yes, we can about. Yes, we can end the war. Yes, we can end poverty. Yes, we can end racism. Yes, we can. All these things. He never said that. And having never said that, he thinks he's a game that's off the hook. Well, his time has come to an end. I am setting my sights, and I think the world sets their sights on, this is America's real moment of acid test. Where do we go from here? What do we now say? We've had our black president, we've had our liberals, we've had our reactionaries, we've had an awful lot. What will the American people choose to be the next step into history?
Part of that question that I'd love you to tackle is, how do you teach youth respect when a lot of the conversations, however people feel about what the president's accomplished agenda-wise, often is wrapped in a tone that is disrespectful, disgusting, inappropriate. How do you, I think it's a good question from the person who wrote this. What would you give advice to all the young people that you speak to, Usher?
As the table has been set of the optimistic reality that there would ever be a black president, it's actually not the youth that you hear as much as you hear radicals who understand the journey and understand what we've come through to be in this position and have this opportunity. So therefore, there is an expectation that Barack Obama would never be able to live up to.
What are two things, this is from DeMonte.
I'd like to just add something.
Sure. Okay.
That I think is very critical. When you talk about the 1950s and the 60s and the time in which our movement evolved, history did more to make John Kennedy than John Kennedy did to make history. He had the peace movement, he had a restless campus throughout the educational system in this country. Every campus in America was askew with young kids who didn't want to be drafted because the draft was the name of the game, did not want to be sent off to fight a war that they did not understand. It had the civil rights movement. They had the world at large, which was emerging in foreign policy. All those countries that I mentioned earlier were just becoming, there was no Kenya before Kennedy. There was no Ghana. There was no Nigeria. None of these places had come into full bloom and fruition until the moment of his presidency. Not just because of him, but despite him. And I think that we have to understand that America, the people of this country, have abandoned their responsibility to making there's a story, and I'll tell this very quickly. Eleanor Roosevelt had dinner once with her husband and suggested that she meet a man by the name of A. Philip Randolph. And A. Philip Randolph was a black labor leader, the most articulate, one of the most educated men of the day. This was back in 1930s. She said, "You should meet Franklin. I'd like you two to talk." And she brought him to the White House, and they talked. And President Roosevelt listened keenly to what it was that A. Philip Randolph had to say. And he spoke about lynching. He spoke about racism. The litany of information was available to Roosevelt. And Roosevelt listened. At the end of the thing, Roosevelt said to A. Philip Randolph, "Mr. Randolph, I've heard everything you've said about race and lynchings and second-class citizenship, and there's nothing that I disagree with, including your overture to me to use the bully pulpit to do what you think needs to be done. I have one request of you in this mission. My request of you is, would you please go out and make me do it?" And I think the charge to the American people is, it's not enough to bemoan what's absent. What role have you played in the absence of attendance? What have you done?
What two things, Usher, would you recommend to young adults to be on the road to success and financial independence?
Rob a bank.
That's a different answer than I thought you were going to give.
You said two, and don't get caught.
A serious and a challenging question.
I was serious.
No, I'm moving on. I'm moving on to the next one.
Me too.
How do you think you can fix the police brutality problem we have today?
Let me just make this observation. Policemen do what they're trained to do and required to do. This black child named Aisha Scott, 5 years old, down in Florida, in the classroom, being thrown across her desk, being handcuffed by 3 white police officers and charged with having been unruly in the classroom, was immoral. It was an abuse and a misuse of the police presence and the police power to call on them to come in to repair a problem that had nothing to do with police. They can't fix, there's no after-school program, there's no school program, you've cut back on teachers, you've cut back on education, you've cut back on everything, and now you throw the police in there to clean up the mess. But I think it's unfair. It's unfair, and people shouldn't buy that. Don't call the cops to fix the classroom. Get the politicians and get the banks and get everyone else. So from the point of view of police, I think they're individual cops who can make a choice to be brutal or to be humane and apply themselves. But I think that by and large, the entire police force cannot be held hostage to the fact that there's something politically wrong with what they've been asked to do by people who are the portrayers of evil and the designers of how our dysfunctionality reveals itself in our system. It's bad news. Don't ask cops to go in and arrest a kid because the kid's been unruly. Get a psychologist. Bring that child's mother into the school. I'm beginning to sound like Bill Cosby, for Christ's sake. But there is that moral place, you know. Don't ask cops to do what cops are not trained to do or don't want to do.
Our final question. I'm a hip hop artist from Denver, Colorado. I actually thought this might end up with, and I have my demo reel with me, Usher, but it doesn't go that way. He says, my mentor, Vincent Harding, always challenged me to create songs that can be sung together in the streets, songs that can be easily shared and learned. Could you lead us in a song of power here and now, sir?
That is a bit of a tall order, but definitely an effort worth going after. It's a conversation that is not just one song. It's a collaborative effort of all artists. Now, earlier you said if there were two things or two people or anything that you could do to assure financial independence. The first thing I would say is
Not
find
rob
a
a bank.
mentor, right? Not rob a bank. We'll have a mentor that won't tell you to rob a bank.
I'll remember that.
Having a mentor. And then a point of reference that is assured with some sense of integrity. You know, I think of the role models of the young men and women from impoverished areas and inner city communities, and the role models are no longer doctors. The role models are no longer educators. The role models are much different. Be careful of what you aspire to be. That's the other thing. Again, that is a tall order, and it's a step that I've taken to utilize my platform as a result of a harsh reality. A harsh reality that facilitates me the opportunity to start a conversation. It is an invitation for you to take a look at the issue and begin to find out if you can do something to change this reality. That's what music should be used for. We were upstairs and I'm listening to Sam Cooke and I hear such pain and anger in his voice, speaking of the reality of where he was and what was going on at that time. What are we choosing to speak about as artists? That's what's important. So it's a challenge from him to me, to the rest of the artists who have their platforms, to be careful of what you say.
I read it also as a challenge to have the two of you lead us in song of power. just saying how I read it. Because I assume that it's, that Johnny, I assume he wasn't talking to me about singing.
I've been trying to get him in the studio, but he keeps standing me up.
Would you do song together ever? I mean, in the studio or what?
Let me
You had to think about it.
let me put the hesitation in a proper context. It is this. I have not sung in 10 years.
Well, they are offering.
Yes, Ma. And I don't sing because I had a stroke. And in that stroke some years ago, part of the problem with the blood clot that lodged at the base of the brain was that it impeded my equilibrium. and it weakened my vocal capacity. In that context, I'm not about to let the last thing that you remember
And Usher, what's your story?
sitting up here trying to croak out a song in the presence of Usher at a time when we're discussing what's one of the many opportunities that are at our disposal. Because there are some songs that I think we could sing. There are some things I think we can do. There are others we can reach out for to bring into the fold and to our platform, whom we can mentor, which is one of the most important things that are in my life every day with Matilda Cuomo and the mentorship that she does. We will mentor artists. We will come together and find a song that it is worthy of my problem, and at the same time worthy of his great genius. So when you do hear it, you'll be sorry I didn't sing it tonight.
And with that, Harry Belafonte and Usher Raymond. Amazing.